He's the kind of man who built empires, but lost the only thing that ever truly mattered. James Carter, a wealthy finance CEO living in a Manhattan penthouse, carries a silent weight no money can erase. 10 years ago, a car crash stole his wife and daughter. Since then, he's chased profits, not peace. But one golden autumn afternoon in Central Park, everything changes. Near the lake, two children, twins no older than 8, sell homemade cookies beside a cardboard sign. Help our mom get heart surgery. Something in their eyes stops James cold. Then the girl hands him a cookie that says hope. The same word, the same design, as the last cookie he made for his daughter. His world cracks. And when the boy whispers, "Our mom's really sick, sir. We're just trying to help," something awakens in James. Something he thought had died. Who are these kids? Why do they look so familiar? And what hidden thread ties them to the past James thought he buried? As the mystery deepens and an imposter arrives with claims that could ruin James's legacy, he must make a choice: walk away from the children, or become the father they never had. This is a story of second chances, hidden family, and the power of love to heal the deepest wounds. If you believe in the magic of unexpected reunions and the courage it takes to change, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. More powerful stories are waiting for you. The late afternoon sun filtered through golden leaves, casting a warm glow across Central Park's winding paths. The scent of roasted chestnuts hung in the air, mingling with the crispness of fall. A perfect day for anyone willing to slow down long enough to notice. But James Carter barely noticed seasons anymore. He walked briskly, hands in the pockets of his tailored coat, trying to outpace the thoughts chasing him. At 45, James was everything Wall Street worshipped: founder and CEO of one of the top financial firms in Manhattan, a man whose name echoed in boardrooms and headlines. Yet, behind his tailored suits and penthouse views was a man slowly unraveling. Every step he took echoed through the hollowness of his success. It had been 10 years since the accident. 10 years since the icy road, the missed call, and the loss of the two people who once anchored his world. Emily, Ava. Their names lingered on his lips in quiet prayers he never voiced aloud. And though time had dulled the sharp edges of his grief, it hadn't healed the chasm left behind. He wasn't supposed to be in the park. He'd canceled a meeting to get away from yet another investor call and found himself here, wandering. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe peace, maybe punishment, maybe both. As he neared the edge of the lake, something unusual caught his eye. A small wooden table with a hand-painted sign, propped up slightly crooked on the grass. "Cookies for Mom's heart surgery. Please help?" James slowed. Behind the table stood two children, twins, maybe 8 years old, wrapped in mismatched sweaters and knit hats too big for their heads. A boy and a girl. They were carefully arranging rows of homemade cookies inside plastic containers, each labeled with uneven handwriting and little hearts drawn in red marker. The girl noticed him first. Her eyes lit up with a hopeful smile that reached right into his chest and squeezed. "Hi, mister," she chirped, stepping forward. "Would you like to buy some cookies? We made them ourselves." James hesitated, then approached slowly. He hadn't spoken to a child in years, not since Ava. The boy straightened up beside her, watching him carefully, protective, quiet. "They're only $1, he said. James looked down at the small spread. Chocolate chip, oatmeal raisin, a few with colorful frosting. One cookie stood out, a sugar cookie with chocolate lettering. It read, "Hope." He blinked. The same word, the same style. He had once decorated a cookie just like that for Ava's 8th birthday. She'd giggled when he presented it to her, her little fingers clutching it like it was treasure. He reached out, picked it up. "You made this?" The girl nodded proudly. "That one's my favorite. I thought, maybe if we put words like hope on them, people would feel happy when they eat them." James looked at her more closely now. Her curly dark hair peeked out from under her hat. Her eyes, hazel flecked with green, shimmered in the sunlight, so like Emily's it nearly knocked the breath from him. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "I'm Lily, and this is my brother Lucas." She beamed. "We're 8. Lucas nodded, still watching him. "Our mom's in the hospital. She needs a new heart, but the surgery costs a lot." James crouched slightly to meet them at eye level. "Where's your dad?" Lucas hesitated. Lily looked down. "He left," she whispered. "Said he'd come back, but he never did." James swallowed hard. The tightness in his chest returned, but this time it wasn't grief. It was something else. Urgency. Compassion. A thread pulling at him with invisible force. "How much have you raised so far?" he asked. Lily held up a nearly empty jar. $32.75. James reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his wallet. He didn't think, didn't calculate. He handed Lily 5 crisp $100 bills. Her eyes widened. Are you sure?" James nodded, his voice unusually husky. "You keep going, okay? Keep giving people hope." As he turned to leave, Lucas called out, "Wait, are you an angel or something?" James stopped mid-step, caught between a chuckle and a lump in his throat. He glanced back, sunlight painting the children in gold. "No, kid," he said, "but maybe I used to know one." He walked away slowly, but something inside him had shifted. The world wasn't silent anymore, and as the wind carried the faint sounds of laughter and clinking cookie jars behind him, James Carter, billionaire, recluse, and ghost of his own past, took his first real breath in a decade. He didn't know it yet, but that cookie marked more than a memory. It marked the beginning of everything he thought he'd lost, finding its way back to him. The next morning, James Carter stood motionless at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, clutching a coffee he hadn't tasted. Below him, Manhattan pulsed like a machine, busy, impatient, oblivious. But all he could see was a little girl handing him a cookie that said, "Hope," and a boy asking if he was an angel. The moment had haunted him through the night. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, it wasn't spreadsheets or quarterly earnings he saw. It was Lily's face, lit with hope far too large for someone so small. And Lucas, silent, guarded, protective, reminded him of himself at that age. Left alone too soon, forced to become something too heavy, too fast. He didn't go into the office that day. Instead, he found himself back at Central Park, the rustle of leaves beneath his leather shoes as he retraced yesterday's steps. The little table was still there, but now it was bare. No cookies, no sign, no twins. He stood there longer than he meant to, his hands deep in his coat pockets, staring at the empty space like it might speak to him. Just as he turned to leave, he heard a voice behind him. "They're usually here in the mornings, but only on weekends." James turned. An older woman sat on a bench nearby, scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, feeding birds from a small paper bag. "You know them?" he asked gently. The woman gave a faint smile. "Everyone around here does. Sweet kids. Their mom's been real sick. Poor things show up with those cookies like clockwork. Say it's to help pay the hospital." James hesitated, heart quickening. "Do you know where they live?" The woman shook her head. "Somewhere in the East Harlem area, I think. I heard the mom was taken to Mount Sinai. That's all I know, sorry." Mount Sinai. The name dropped into his chest like a stone. It wasn't far from his own building, but it might as well have been a different world. By mid-afternoon, James stood in the hospital's main lobby, the kind of place he normally passed through with calculated detachment. Today, he felt strangely exposed, like he was stepping into someone else's life, and maybe, just maybe, his own. The nurse at the front desk looked up as he approached. "Can I help you?" He paused. "I'm trying to check on a patient. I don't know her last name. Her children are Lily and Lucas, 8 years old. They've been selling cookies in the park to help pay for her heart surgery." The nurse blinked. Then her face softened. "That sounds like Sarah Daniels. She's in cardiac ICU. We don't normally release information to non-family, but—" She studied his face. "You're not the first person who's come in asking about her because of those kids." James's voice dropped, touched with something real. "Is she okay?" "She's stable for now, but it's serious. She's in an induced coma, waiting on a transplant match." His throat tightened. "And the kids?" The nurse nodded toward the waiting area. "Sometimes they sit there after school. We try to keep an eye on them, but it's hard. No guardian right now." James turned and spotted them immediately. Lily was curled up in one of the stiff hospital chairs, her head on Lucas's shoulder. Lucas sat straight, not moving, eyes alert, too alert. A small backpack sat at their feet. Next to it, a battered cookie tin. James approached slowly. Lucas looked up first, recognition flickering across his face. "You came back," the boy said cautiously. James nodded. "I told you I would." Lily stirred, rubbing her eyes, and smiled sleepily when she saw him. "Hi, Mr. James." He blinked at the sound of his name. "How do you know?" "You gave me your business card when I gave you the cookie," she said proudly, pulling it from her pocket like a lucky charm. James chuckled softly, kneeling down. "That was smart." Lucas's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why are you here?" The boy wasn't being rude, just protective. James respected that. "I wanted to check on your mom," James said, "and on you two." The moment hung in the air. Lily leaned forward and whispered, "They say Mommy needs a new heart, but we don't have enough money." James's jaw clenched. "You shouldn't be worrying about that." "But we are," Lucas said firmly. "No one else is." James swallowed hard. He looked around. This sterile lobby, these lonely kids, this hospital that smelled like bleach and fear, and something broke loose inside him. This wasn't charity. It was something deeper, a pull he couldn't name but couldn't ignore. "I'd like to help," he said quietly. "Really help." Lucas tilted his head. "Like, pay for the surgery?" James nodded. "Yes." The boy didn't react at first. Then he said, "People say stuff all the time. Doesn't mean they mean it." Lily tugged James's sleeve gently. "I believe him, Lucas. I do." James placed a hand over his heart. "So do I." And in that moment, with a simple promise and 2 sets of trusting eyes watching him, James Carter made the first real commitment he'd made in years. Not to investors, not to shareholders, but to 2 kids with cookie tins and hearts full of hope. By the time James Carter left Mount Sinai, the early evening sky had turned a hazy lavender, brushing the city skyline with hues of dusk. He stepped into the chilled air, feeling something unfamiliar in his chest. Weight, but not the usual kind. It wasn't the heaviness of mergers or market shifts. This was personal, human, and it tightened around him as he rode the elevator back up to his penthouse where silence was always waiting. He didn't pour a drink. He didn't take off his coat. Instead, he sat down at his grand dining table, alone, staring at the space across from him as if it might fill itself with someone small and joyful. Lily's smile, Lucas's quiet defiance, that word, hope, written in frosting like a message from a time he could never get back. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Gina," he said, as his assistant answered on the second ring. "I need a private nurse, experienced with children, preferably with trauma or loss. Background check, references, everything. I need her on standby by morning." Gina, ever efficient, didn't ask why. "Of course. Anything else?" James hesitated. "Send someone to Mount Sinai tomorrow. Cover any unpaid balances on Sarah Daniels' account. Quietly." There was a brief pause. Done, she said, softer than usual. The next morning, James returned to the hospital, this time with more than a wallet. He brought intention. He found the twins again in the waiting room, sleepy but still dressed in the same worn clothes. They looked up as he approached. "Hi," Lily greeted, her voice bright despite the circles under her eyes. Lucas didn't speak, but he nodded. James took a breath. "I thought maybe you could come with me today, just for a while," he offered. "Somewhere warm, with food that doesn't come from a vending machine." Lily's eyes lit up, then flickered uncertainly toward her brother. Lucas furrowed his brow. "We can't just leave. What if something happens?" James crouched down. "I spoke to the nurses. They'll call us if anything changes. And I'll bring you back tonight, I promise." Lucas looked at Lily, then back to James. "Only if you don't lie to us." "I won't." That answer, spoken so plainly, held more truth than most contracts James had signed in his career. An hour later, the elevator doors to his penthouse opened, and Lily let out an audible gasp. Whoa. Lucas's jaw slackened, just a little. The massive windows, the gleaming hardwood floors, the open fireplace, it was a world they had never stepped into, but it wasn't the luxury that stunned them. It was the warmth, the smell of pancakes, the soft music playing in the background. James had gone out of his way to make it feel less like a boardroom and more like a home. "I thought you two might be hungry," he said, awkwardly flipping another pancake onto a plate. "I haven't cooked in a while, so—" "You made these?" Lily asked, wide-eyed. James chuckled, scratching his head. "Let's just say I tried. The smoke alarm only went off once." Lucas picked up his fork, eyeing the food warily. Then he took a bite. A slow smile crept across his face. "It's not bad." It was the highest praise James could have hoped for. As they ate, James noticed something on Lily's wrist, a charm bracelet. Tiny plastic beads strung together, some letters spelling out AVA. His breath caught. "Where did you get that?" he asked gently. Lily looked at it, then back up. "It was my mommy's cousin's bracelet when she was little. She gave it to Mommy, and then Mommy gave it to me. Mommy said it belonged to someone really special." James's hand trembled slightly. "Ava?" "My daughter's name was Ava," he said, almost inaudibly. "She passed away when she was your age." Lily leaned closer, her small hand reaching across the table to touch his. "I think maybe that's why you found us," she whispered. Lucas watched, quietly taking everything in. Later, after the kids curled up on the oversized sofa watching cartoons, dozing off halfway through, James went to the guest room where they had dropped their things. Their backpack sat unzipped. A tattered stuffed bunny peeked out, and something else caught his eye. A photo, folded and creased at the corners. He pulled it out carefully. It was old, slightly faded, but unmistakable. Emily, his late wife. Standing next to a younger woman, Sarah, arms wrapped around each other, and between them, two toddlers, Lily and Lucas. His knees nearly gave out. He had no idea Sarah was Emily's cousin, that these children were family. His family. The world tilted. The cookie, the bracelet, the eyes had all made sense now. He closed his eyes, emotion swelling like a tidal wave inside him. This wasn't coincidence. It was something deeper, something destined. James stood frozen in the doorway of the guest room, his breath shallow as he stared at the photograph in his hands. It was a memory he never knew existed. Emily, youthful and radiant, holding on to Sarah like they were tethered by something more than just blood. And those toddlers, those unmistakable curls and eyes. Lily and Lucas. His connection to them wasn't imagined. It was real, tangible, undeniable. He traced Emily's smile with his thumb, overwhelmed by the quiet realization. These children weren't just strangers he happened to stumble across in a park. They were part of her, part of the family he'd buried in grief. They were his second chance, not just to give, but to love again. Later that evening, Lily stirred from her nap on the couch and padded softly into the kitchen where James sat with the photo in front of him, untouched coffee at his side. "Is that my mommy?" she asked gently, peering over the table. James nodded slowly. "Yes." And the woman next to her, "She was my wife, Emily." Lily tilted her head. "So, that means your mommy and my wife were family, and that makes us connected too." Lily smiled faintly, then crawled into the chair beside him. "I knew you felt familiar." James let out a low breath, full of both relief and something heavier. "I wish I'd known sooner. I wish I'd kept in touch with Emily's family after she—" His voice caught and Lily reached out to rest her hand on his. "It's okay," she said softly. "You found us now." He squeezed her fingers gently, grateful for the forgiveness of children, how freely they offered it, how purely they trusted. But peace never lasted long. Just as James was cleaning up dinner plates and Lily was giggling at Lucas trying to set up a blanket fort in the living room, the doorbell rang. Sharp, repetitive, urgent. James paused. Very few people had the address to his penthouse. He approached the door cautiously. Through the peephole, he saw a man, mid-30s, unshaven, dressed in a leather jacket and scuffed boots. There was something off in his posture, something both rehearsed and aggressive. James opened the door an inch, keeping the chain on. "Can I help you?" The man leaned forward. "Yeah, I'm here for my kids. Lily and Lucas. I'm their father." James's eyes narrowed. "And you are—" "Name's Eric Daniels, Sarah's husband." The man's tone was slick, forced. "I heard you took them. Appreciate the help, but I'll take it from here." Behind James, Lily's voice trembled. "That's not our daddy." James closed the door just enough to slide the chain off, then opened it fully and stepped outside, blocking the view into his home. "I'm going to need some proof of that," he said, calm but firm. Eric scoffed. "Proof? I don't need to prove anything. I'm their father. Look, they're better off with me than with some rich guy trying to play hero." James's jaw tightened. "If you really cared about those kids, you'd know they don't call you Dad. They don't trust you, and neither do I." Eric stepped closer, voice lowering. "You think just because you've got a nice suit and a fancy apartment, you can buy your way into their lives? People are going to start asking questions. What a powerful CEO is doing taking in sick women's kids. That sound like a clean headline to you?" There it was, the threat. James stood his ground. "You listen to me, and you listen carefully. If you come near those children again, you'll have a lawsuit on your hands, and I'll make sure it sticks. Don't underestimate what I'm willing to do to protect them." Eric glared at him, lips curling. "You think you're their savior? I'll have a lawyer at your door tomorrow. You'll see." James didn't flinch. "Make sure they bring ID, and maybe a conscience." Eric spat on the ground and turned, muttering curses as he disappeared into the elevator. James re-entered the penthouse, closing the door and locking it tight. He exhaled heavily, trying to steady his nerves. Lily stood in the hallway, her face pale. "Is he really coming back?" James knelt in front of her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "If he does, I'll be here. You're safe. No one's taking you away. Not without a fight." Lucas stepped beside her, silent as always, but, for the first time, he didn't look afraid. He looked ready, as if he'd been waiting for someone to finally stand in the doorway and keep danger out. And, in that moment, James realized something. This wasn't just about helping anymore. It was about becoming something, someone these children could rely on. Not a visitor, not a benefactor, a protector, a presence. A father. The night after Eric's visit was restless. James barely slept, haunted by the look in Lily's eyes, fear masked by bravery, a kind of courage no child should have to learn. Lucas had curled up on the couch, arms folded tight across his chest like a barrier. James had offered the guest rooms again, but the twins had stayed close, unwilling to stray too far from the safety they'd only just begun to trust. By sunrise, James was in the kitchen, making scrambled eggs, his second attempt in as many days. He still didn't quite know how much salt to use, but Lucas had eaten everything the day before without complaint, so he figured he couldn't be too far off. Lily wandered in, hair tousled, dragging her stuffed bunny by one ear. "Smells better than the hospital food," she said sleepily, climbing into a stool. "That's the bar we're aiming for," James replied with a grin. Lucas joined moments later, rubbing his eyes and glancing toward the windows. "Is he coming back?" James placed a plate in front of him, then crouched beside the boy. "Not today. And if he does, we'll be ready." The quiet nod James received in return felt like something sacred, a beginning. After breakfast, he called Gina again. "Find me the best family law attorney in the city," he said without preamble. There was a pause. "Is this about the kids?" "Yes. And run a background check on Eric Daniels, discreetly. I want to know what kind of man he really is." James hung up before she could ask more questions. He knew Gina wouldn't press. She was loyal, precise, and knew how to work in shadows when needed. By mid-morning, he had arranged for a private consultation with a lawyer named Miriam Klein, a sharp but warm woman whose reputation for defending vulnerable families preceded her. She met James in his office, his real one, the glass fortress on the 34th floor overlooking Midtown, and brought with her a level of clarity he hadn't realized he was craving. "I've seen a dozen men like this Eric Daniels," she said, flipping through the initial report. "Absent until someone else steps up. Then suddenly he wants control, not out of love, but pride. Or worse, leverage." James leaned forward. "What can I do?" "You're not their legal guardian," she said gently. "That means, in the eyes of the law, you have no rights over them. Yet. But—" She tapped the paper. "With their mother incapacitated and no one else stepping forward, you can petition for temporary guardianship. And if Sarah recovers? Then it's up to her, but given your connection, your late wife being her cousin, and the stability you can provide, the courts will take it seriously." James sat back, the weight of the decision slowly anchoring itself in his chest. This wasn't just kindness anymore. It was legal, real, permanent, if fate allowed. "I'll do it," he said, "whatever it takes." Later that afternoon, he took Lily and Lucas back to the hospital. They clutched each other's hands as they walked through the automatic doors, their steps slowing the closer they came to the ICU. A nurse greeted them with a sad smile, gently explaining that Sarah's condition hadn't changed, but she was still stable. They stood beside her bed quietly. Machines beeped steadily, tubes ran across her chest and arms, and her face, so pale and still, barely looked like the photo James had found. Yet, there was strength there. Strength buried under the weight of sickness, but still alive. Lucas pulled a drawing from his backpack and laid it on the bedside table. It was of Sarah, Lily, and him, standing under a tree. Beside them was a man in a suit, holding their hands. James stared at it. He was the man, a stick figure with glasses and a crooked smile. "You drew me?" he asked gently. Lucas shrugged, a little shy. "You're part of us now, right?" James blinked back emotion. "Yeah, I guess I am." Lily reached for Sarah's hand, placing her tiny fingers around her mother's limp ones. "We're okay, Mommy. He's taking care of us." That night, back in the penthouse, James tucked them in for the first time. They chose to sleep in the same room, 2 twin beds pushed close together in the guest suite he'd had redesigned within hours. Soft night lights glowed from the corners, and Lucas insisted on keeping the door cracked open. As James rose to leave, Lily whispered, "Will you be here in the morning?" He paused at the doorway. "Every morning." She smiled sleepily. "Okay. Good night, Mr. James." He smiled faintly. "You can just call me James." Lucas turned his head from the pillow. "You sure?" James nodded. "Unless you'd rather call me something else." Lily giggled softly. "Like what?" James hesitated. Then, almost reverently, "I don't know. We can figure it out. Together." They didn't respond, but as he stepped into the hall, he heard Lily whisper to Lucas, "He's not just a helper. He's home." James paused, hand resting against the wall. In a world where his name once opened doors and closed deals, it had never meant what it did now. Now, it meant safety. It meant presence. It meant he wasn't just a man trying to fix a broken past. He was someone building a future. The scent of cinnamon and vanilla drifted through the penthouse as James leaned over the kitchen counter, focused intently on a tray of freshly baked cookies. He wore an apron that Lily had insisted he use, pink, with a cartoon cat stitched across the front and the words "Chef in Training." He'd never imagined himself here, measuring flour with a child beside him, but somehow it all felt right. Lily perched on a stool next to him, watching with narrowed eyes as he carefully squeezed icing onto a still warm cookie. "No, no," she said, gently taking the piping bag from his hands. "You have to angle it, like this." Her small fingers guided his, delicately swirling the icing into a little heart. "See?" James smiled genuinely. "You're a better teacher than half my company." She giggled. "Do you make cookies at work?" "Not unless the market crashes and people need comfort food," he said dryly, earning another round of giggles. Lucas sat at the dining table, quietly sketching in a notebook. He wasn't as quick to join in the silliness, but his shoulders had relaxed. He didn't flinch when James walked by anymore. He even asked questions sometimes, short ones like, "How tall is your building?" or "What's the fastest car you've ever driven?" But they meant something. Trust, James realized, was never loud. It was in the quiet details, the eye contact, the unspoken presence. As the afternoon waned, James offered to take them to a bookstore near Columbus Circle. Lily's eyes lit up instantly. "Can we get the one about the unicorn that flies?" And Lucas asked quietly if he could find a new journal, one with thicker pages. They bundled up in coats and scarves, and as they stepped into the street, James noticed how Lily clung to his hand without hesitation, how Lucas walked beside him without dragging his feet. It felt normal, comfortably unfamiliar, like slipping into a life he never knew he'd needed. At the bookstore, Lily ran ahead, darting through the aisles like a hummingbird. Lucas browsed the shelves with quiet intensity, and James stood between them, keeping one eye on each. That's when he noticed a man at the end of the aisle, pretending to read but clearly watching them. Tall, clean-shaven, with a phone held chest-high, recording. James's stomach twisted. He walked over, calmly but firmly. "Is there something I can help you with?" The man smirked. "Just documenting a heartwarming story. Tech billionaire adopts orphans. Feels very brandable. You've got the perfect angle." James's expression hardened. "Delete it." The man shrugged. "Public place. Besides, this kind of thing gets views. You might as well lean in. The boardroom loves redemption arcs." James stepped closer, voice low and steel-wrapped. "If that footage ends up anywhere, I'll make it my mission to trace every click back to your name. And I guarantee you, your career, your reputation, and your credibility will vanish faster than your upload speed." The man paled, fumbled with his phone, and turned to leave. James watched until he disappeared into the street. When he turned back, Lucas stood at the end of the aisle, watching silently. "Was that guy bothering you?" Lucas asked. James hesitated. "Yeah, but it's handled." Lucas nodded, then held up a book. "I found one with thick paper." James smiled gently, ruffling his hair. "Good choice." Back at the penthouse after dinner and bath time, James found himself sitting on the floor in the living room, watching as Lily insisted on organizing a cookie party with her stuffed animals. Lucas was helping set out napkins, carefully folding each one like he'd seen at restaurants. "You ever do this with your mom?" James asked, his voice soft. Lily nodded. "Sometimes. She always said we had to make joy on purpose, or else the world would forget how." James's throat tightened. "She sounds like a good mom." "She is," Lily said proudly. "She's just sleeping for a while." James cleared his throat, emotions too thick to swallow. "You know, I used to think happiness was something that happened after success, that if I worked hard enough, earned enough, I'd finally feel full." Lucas looked up. "Do you feel full now?" James didn't speak for a moment. Then he smiled, slowly, truthfully. "For the first time in a long time. Yeah, I do." They sat like that for a while, 3 people, 1 stitched family, in a home that was no longer cold. That night, as James turned out the hallway lights, he heard a whisper behind him. "Good night, Dad." He froze. Lily stood in the doorway, clutching her bunny. "I mean, if that's okay." James's heart swelled so suddenly it ached. He crossed the hallway and knelt beside her, his voice low and full of awe. "It's more than okay." He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight as tears slipped silently down his cheek. Because in that small, whispered word, everything changed. Not because he'd earned it, but because he showed up. 2 days after Lily first called him Dad, James stood at the kitchen counter, holding a framed photo from his office desk, a photo he hadn't really looked at in years. Emily and Ava grinning beside a Christmas tree, their matching red pajamas glowing in the soft amber light. It had always sat there, unassuming, behind spreadsheets and press clippings, a piece of his past he tried not to disturb. Now he couldn't stop staring. "Mr. James," Gina's voice echoed from his phone speaker. "I sent over the report on Eric Daniels. You're going to want to sit down for this." He already was. "Go ahead." He was never legally married to Sarah. No marriage license, no joint bank accounts, nothing that would hold up in court. He's been in and out of work for years. Minor fraud charges, domestic complaints in 2 states, though nothing stuck. He's never once filed for custody. James's jaw tensed. "So, he has no legal claim to the children?" "None. But he's already started talking to the press." James closed his eyes. "He gave an interview this morning, claimed you're trying to steal his kids for image rehab. Said your firm is covering it all up to distract from, quote, insider issues at Carter Financial." James scoffed. "There are no insider issues." "There are now," Gina said grimly. "The board's calling an emergency session. They want to clarify the narrative before shareholders catch wind." James stood and crossed to the window, gazing out at the skyline. The buildings looked different now, less like trophies and more like walls closing in. "Set the meeting," he said quietly. "I'll be there." That afternoon, James returned home with pastries in hand, but his smile was strained. Lily was on the rug with coloring books. Lucas, as usual, sketched quietly beside her. When they saw him, they both lit up until they saw his face. Lucas sat up straighter. "What's wrong?" James forced a smile. "Nothing for you to worry about. Just some work stuff." "You're lying," Lucas said softly. James exhaled and crouched beside them. "Okay, someone's spreading lies about me, about why I'm helping you. And now the people I work with, they're worried it could hurt the company." Lily's face twisted with worry. "Are they going to make you stop?" James looked into her wide eyes and gently shook his head. "No one's going to stop me from loving you. No one's going to take that away." The next morning, James walked into the boardroom at Carter Financial like a man entering a courtroom. The room fell silent. The directors sat with carefully neutral expressions, men and women he'd handpicked over the years now staring at him like a liability. "James," said Trevor Miles, the interim board chair, "we're all concerned. The press is circling like vultures. Forbes has already reached out." James folded his hands calmly. "And what exactly is the narrative we're afraid of?" Trevor didn't flinch. "That this story isn't about family. That it's about deflection. That you're using these children to shield yourself from scrutiny." James chuckled bitterly. "Scrutiny? From what? A lie, told by a deadbeat who walked out on his family and saw an opportunity to sell a headline?" A woman at the end of the table, Mara Singh, leaned in. "James, we know who you are, but perception is public currency. If investors start pulling—" He interrupted. "Then let them." The room froze. "I built this company from nothing. I gave it every hour of my life after I lost mine, but I won't trade my integrity to protect a stock price. Those kids are family. You want to question that, be my guest, but I won't abandon them to protect your comfort." Trevor spoke cautiously. "We just need reassurance. A statement. A plan." James met every eye in the room. "Then here's your statement. I'm stepping away, effective immediately." Murmurs erupted. "For how long?" Trevor asked. James buttoned his coat. "As long as they need me." Back at the penthouse, he found Lily asleep on the couch, her head on Lucas's shoulder. A coloring book lay open beside them. On the page was a drawing of a house. Big windows. A man in a suit holding hands with two smiling kids. Above it, written in uneven crayon, "Home is where we are together." James gently picked up the book, holding it like something sacred. He didn't need to run a company to feel powerful. He didn't need headlines or stock options to matter. He had found his purpose in the laughter of two children, in their trust, in the way Lily reached for his hand without looking, because she knew it would be there. As he covered them with a blanket, Lucas whispered without opening his eyes, "Are we still safe?" James knelt beside him, always. The next few days were quiet, almost too quiet, like the brief hush before a storm. James tried to keep things steady. Morning pancakes, afternoon homework, evening story time. But the tension was there, creeping beneath the surface. He could feel it every time his phone buzzed with an unknown number, every time he caught Lucas glancing at the front door like he was waiting for someone to come barging in. James had stepped away from the boardroom, but the world hadn't stopped spinning. The media firestorm continued to brew. Paparazzi had started staking out near the hospital. One had even tried to follow Lily's school bus, until James made a call and had a legal team remind the man, in no uncertain terms, what harassment of a minors would cost him. Still, the shadows loomed larger every day. And then it happened. It was a Thursday afternoon when the knock came. Not the front door. Security had been reinforced there, but the concierge buzzed to say a man had slipped into the building lobby and was refusing to leave. He had a court order, he claimed, demanded to speak to Mr. Carter. James was already downstairs before the call ended. He found Eric Daniels pacing the lobby, dressed in a designer coat that didn't match the scuffed boots on his feet. He held a manila folder like it was a trophy. "Thought you could keep dodging me?" Eric spat the moment he saw James. "Thought you could hide behind lawyers and nannies?" "I'm here now," James said, his tone low and measured. "Say what you came to say." Eric shoved the folder toward him. "I'm filing for emergency custody. Sarah's still unconscious and I'm their only parent. You're just some billionaire playing daddy for the cameras." James didn't even look at the papers. You're not their father, not legally, not emotionally. You abandoned them, Eric, and now you're trying to profit off them." Eric stepped closer, voice lowering. "You don't get it, do you? You're not the only one who knows how to manipulate perception. I've got journalists waiting to run this. I've got people who want this to get messy. You think you'll keep your squeaky clean image when they find out you've been playing house with another man's kids?" James's gaze didn't waver. "Let them run it. I've already walked away from the only thing that ever needed protecting, my company. What I won't walk away from is those kids." Eric laughed bitterly. "You think this ends with your little moral victory? I'll see you in court, and when I win, I'll make sure they know exactly who gave up." James stepped forward until they were nearly nose to nose. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You walk into that courtroom with lies, and I will bury you with truth. I have documentation, I have witnesses, I have your record, and most importantly," he jabbed a finger toward the folder, "I have them, and they don't want anything to do with you." Eric flinched just slightly before sneering. "We'll see." He turned and stormed out, pushing through the rotating doors like they'd wronged him personally. Back upstairs, James sat down in the study, the unopened folder still in his hands. He should have felt defeated, but all he felt was clarity. This wasn't just about winning, it was about protecting something fragile, something sacred. That night, while Lily helped frost cupcakes in the kitchen and Lucas sketched dragons in the living room, James made a call to Miriam Klein, his attorney. "We need to go on the offensive," he said quietly. "File for legal guardianship. Today." Miriam didn't hesitate. "Done." As he hung up, Lucas looked up from his sketch pad. "Was that about him?" James nodded. "Yes." "Is he going to take us?" "No," James said, his voice steady. "Not as long as I'm here." Lucas studied him for a long moment, then said, "You don't have to fight this hard. We're not your real kids." James's heart cracked. "Don't ever say that again." Lucas blinked. "You are real. You're my kids. I may not have been there when you were born, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Lily appeared beside him, holding a cupcake with far too much frosting. "Even if people say mean things about you?" He smiled gently, taking the messy dessert from her hands. "Even then." She looked up at him, innocent but wise. "Then we believe you." Lucas nodded slowly. "Me too." James wrapped them both into his arms, holding them close as if the world might try to pry them away, but this time he wouldn't let go. Because now he wasn't just stepping into their lives. He was building a wall around them, with love, with truth, with everything he had left to give. It was just past midnight when Lily cried out in her sleep. James heard it through the partially open door, soft at first, then louder, rising into a broken sob. He was out of bed in seconds, barefoot across the hardwood floor, heart hammering like something had snapped loose inside him. He found her tangled in the sheets, her bunny clutched in one arm and the other reaching out toward the empty dark, her cheeks damp with tears. "No! Don't go! Please, don't leave!" He knelt beside her instantly. "Lily, Lily, sweetheart, I'm here." Her eyes fluttered open, wild and glazed with fear. For a moment she didn't recognize him. Her small chest heaved. "I dreamed you were gone," she whispered hoarsely. "And Lucas, too. And Mommy. Mommy was floating away, and no one could catch her." James gently gathered her into his arms, pressing her close to his chest. Her tiny body shook, and he held her tighter, rocking slowly. "I'm here," he murmured. "I'm right here. You're safe." "But people keep trying to take everything," she cried into his shoulder. "What if we lose you too?" James's throat closed. He looked at the ceiling, willing himself to stay steady. "You won't," he said softly, then pulled back to look into her eyes. "Do you hear me, Lily? I'm not leaving. Not tomorrow, not next week, not ever. Her lower lip trembled. Even if that man comes back? Even if the whole world comes knocking, he promised. I'll still be right here, holding your hand. Lily clung to him, quieter now, her breath slowing, the tremors fading. Can I sleep in your room tonight? James smiled gently, lifting her in his arms. Of course you can. He carried her into his room and tucked her into the spot beside where he had been. She curled up instantly, the blanket drawn to her chin, one hand still holding tightly to his. He lay there beside her, staring at the ceiling long after her breathing evened out. And in the dark, with a child's fingers wrapped around his, James Carter, the man once known only for power and precision, felt something more sacred than wealth. He felt needed. The next morning, he woke early to a quiet knock at the front door. To his surprise, it was Miriam Klein, his attorney, with a folder under her arm and a fire in her eyes. "I've got something you'll want to see," she said as James let her in. They sat at the kitchen island, Lily still asleep down the hall, and Lucas quietly reading in the living room. Miriam opened the folder. "We subpoenaed Eric's financials. He recently received a wire transfer, $25,000, from a private PR firm." James blinked. "Someone's paying him?" "More than that," she said. "We traced it to a rival hedge fund. They want to destabilize your name, your legacy. They're hoping the custody battle will discredit you just enough to tank your influence in the next acquisition deal." James leaned back, anger rising slowly, methodically. "So, it was never about the kids." Miriam nodded. "He's a pawn. But the custody hearing's still set for next week. We need to prepare." James rubbed his hands together. "Then we prepare. I'll testify. So will the kids, if necessary." Miriam's face softened. "And Sarah?" He paused. That was the only question he couldn't control. That afternoon, James brought Lily and Lucas to the hospital. It had become a quiet routine. He'd take them every few days to sit with Sarah, hold her hand, talk to her even if she couldn't respond. But today was different. As they entered the room, James noticed a change. The nurses were moving differently. The heart monitor beeped with a steadier rhythm, and Sarah's chest rose with less mechanical effort. Lucas was the first to see it. "Mom?" Sarah's eyelids twitched. James stepped forward, heart pounding. "Sarah?" he said gently, not daring to hope. Her eyes fluttered. Then, slowly, she opened them. The room froze in stunned silence. Lily gasped. Lucas took a step forward, trembling. Sarah blinked. "Where am I?" James exhaled shakily. "You're at Mount Sinai. You've been here for a few weeks." She looked between him and the kids, confused. Her voice cracked. "Are they okay?" Lily burst into tears and ran to her mother's side, holding her hand tightly. "We're okay, Mommy. We're okay." Lucas nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. James stepped back to give them space, but Sarah's eyes locked onto his. "You stayed," she whispered. He nodded, barely able to speak past the emotion in his throat. "I did." She closed her eyes again, not from exhaustion, but from relief. "Thank you," she breathed. For the first time in weeks, James allowed himself to hope, not just for Lily and Lucas, but for the family they might become. Because this was more than a second chance. It was a new beginning. The day of the charity gala arrived with a crisp winter wind rolling through Manhattan's streets. The snow hadn't yet fallen, but the sky carried that quiet weight, the kind that made the city move a little slower, like it knew something important was coming. James adjusted his tie in the mirror, not for vanity, but because his hands needed something to do. Tonight wasn't just about charity or appearances. It was about reclaiming truth in front of a city that had questioned his every move. It was about protecting Lily and Lucas, not from the shadows, but from the noise of a world that never stopped talking. Down the hall, the children were getting ready. Lily twirled in a navy blue velvet dress, the hem brushing her knees, a silver bow clipped delicately into her curls. Lucas wore a blazer and dress shoes for the first time in his life. He tugged at his collar with visible discomfort. "You okay?" James asked, crouching to his level. Lucas shrugged. "What if we mess it up?" James smiled warmly. "There's no way to mess up the truth. You just show up and speak it." At the gala entrance, the flashes of cameras greeted them like a wall of lightning. Reporters leaned over barricades, shouting questions laced with doubt and curiosity. "Mr. Carter, are the children with you tonight? Is this all just for optics?" James didn't respond. He kept walking, one hand on Lily's shoulder, the other holding Lucas's. They moved together through the crowd like a single heartbeat. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere shifted. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead, soft music played, and Manhattan's elite mingled with plastic smiles and champagne flutes. Trevor Miles approached with a carefully polished expression. "Glad you made it, James. Press is watching closely." James nodded once. "Good." He led the children to their table near the front, then stepped toward the stage where a microphone waited beneath a blue velvet curtain. The MC gave a brief introduction, but the audience only quieted when James stepped into the spotlight. "Good evening," he began, voice calm but resonant. "For those who don't know me, my name is James Carter. I've spent most of my life building things, companies, systems, profits." He paused, scanning the room. "But none of it ever gave me what I found in a park one afternoon, in the eyes of two children selling cookies to save their mother's life." Murmurs rippled through the room. James continued. "Since that day, I've learned that family isn't just built through blood or names on paper. It's built through presence, through showing up when it matters most." He reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed envelope. "This is the result of a court-ordered DNA test," he said, holding it up. "Eric Daniels claimed to be the father of Lily and Lucas. He is not. The proof is here. And yet, the truth was always clearer in their voices than on any legal document." He stepped down from the stage as the audience fell into stunned silence. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment. And then, something beautiful happened. Lucas stood, quietly, deliberately, and walked to the microphone. He looked out at the sea of strangers and spoke. "We didn't ask for someone to save us. We just wanted someone to stay." His voice shook, but he kept going. "Mr. James, he didn't just show up. He listened. He made pancakes. He helped with homework. He held my sister when she was scared. He didn't care what other people said." He paused. "He's not our dad because of a piece of paper. He's our dad because we believe him." The crowd was still. Then Lily joined him on stage, taking his hand. "And we choose him," she said simply. Applause rose slowly at first, then filled the room like a wave, washing over them all. Back at the table, Miriam Klein leaned in to James and whispered, "That just won you the judge, the public, and probably another $1 million in your firm's valuation." James didn't respond. He was too busy wiping a tear from his eye. Later that night, the three of them returned home, tired, quiet, but filled with something that hummed like warmth through the walls. James tucked them into bed. Lily clutched her stuffed bunny. Lucas curled toward the wall with his journal beneath his pillow. As James turned to leave, Lucas spoke without turning around. "Thanks for letting us speak." James looked back. "You didn't need my permission. You spoke from your heart. That's more powerful than anything I could have said." Lily smiled sleepily. "Did we do good?" James knelt between their beds, kissed each forehead gently. "You did perfect." As he stepped out and pulled the door nearly closed, he paused to listen. He heard breathing, he heard peace, and he realized This wasn't the end of a battle, it was the beginning of something sacred. The morning after the gala felt different, like the world had exhaled. Snow had dusted the city overnight, softening the skyline into something hushed and beautiful. James stood at the window with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hand, watching the flakes fall in slow, deliberate spirals. Behind him, laughter echoed from the hallway. Lily chasing Lucas with a pillow, both of them barefoot, giddy, alive. It was the sound of home, a sound he hadn't realized he'd missed until it became a daily chorus. But beneath that joy lingered a quiet anticipation. Today, James and Sarah were due in court. Today, everything they'd fought for would either be protected or put at risk. He glanced toward the guest room, Sarah's room now. She was recovering faster than anyone expected. Her cheeks were no longer pale, her eyes had regained that fire that once matched Emily's. Still, she moved slowly, each step measured. But today, she insisted on walking into that courtroom under her own strength. By late morning, they arrived at the courthouse hand in hand with the twins, Miriam flanking them like a guardian in a tailored gray suit. The press lined the sidewalk, but James barely heard them. His focus was on the little hands in his, the steady breath of the woman beside him. Inside, the courtroom was quiet but tense. Eric Daniels sat with his attorney, posture cocky, tie too tight. He looked at Sarah like she was still weak. He looked at James like the cameras might save him. They wouldn't. The judge, a stern, soft-spoken woman named Judge Ramirez, called the hearing to order. Sarah spoke first. She stood, weak but steady, her voice raspier than before but rich with conviction. "I may not have a perfect past," she began, "but I love my children with everything I have, and when I couldn't protect them, James did. He didn't do it for applause or headlines. He did it when no one was watching. That's what makes him family." Her words hung in the air like breath on glass. Eric rose next. His attorney prompted him to read from a script, but he discarded the paper and leaned forward, voice oily. "I just want what's best for my kids," he said. "And I don't think being raised by a man with his name in the tabloids is it. Sure, he's rich, but does that make him a father?" He smirked, confident, smug. Then James stood, and the room stilled. He didn't bring notes, didn't clear his throat. He just looked directly at the judge, then at Lily and Lucas, who sat quietly behind Miriam. "I've made more mistakes than I can count," James began. "I built a life thinking success would fix everything, but it didn't. It just made the silence louder." He paused, then stepped forward. "Then I met 2 kids selling cookies in the cold, and they reminded me that love isn't loud. It's consistent. It's pancakes on a Sunday. It's brushing knots out of hair even when your fingers fumble. It's promising to stay, even when staying is hard." His voice trembled. "I don't want to replace anyone. I want to stand with them, with Sarah, with these kids, because they gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever." He turned to the judge, voice quiet now. "If this court will allow it, I'd be honored to be their guardian." A long silence followed, the kind that feels holy. Judge Ramirez looked down at the files, then back up. "I've reviewed the statements, the reports, and the testimonies. Mr. Daniels," she said, turning to Eric, "you've failed to provide any documentation of paternity or prior care. You've proven no consistent effort to support these children before their mother's hospitalization." Eric's jaw clenched. "As such," she continued, "custody will not be granted to you." Then she turned to Sarah. "Ms. Daniels, given your recovery and your wishes and the unique bond between your children and Mr. Carter, this court is prepared to grant joint guardianship. Temporary, for now, with review in 6 months." Sarah nodded tearfully. And then the judge looked at James. "Mr. Carter, This is not a responsibility given lightly, but you've proven, beyond wealth, beyond name, that your heart is exactly where it needs to be." James blinked back tears. "Thank you, Your Honor." Eric stormed out of the courtroom, shoving past reporters, a man defeated by his own emptiness. No one followed him. James turned to Lily and Lucas, who ran to him without hesitation. Lily jumped into his arms. Lucas buried his face into James's coat. "We did it," Lily whispered. James kissed her temple. "No, sweetheart, you did it." That night they celebrated with hot chocolate and a makeshift fort in the living room. Sarah sat with them, propped on pillows, watching her children laugh like they hadn't in months. Lucas handed James a folded paper, a drawing. It was of their family, him, Lily, Lucas, Sarah, and above them a star-filled sky with one large word written in bold, childish letters. Forever. James didn't say a word. He just held them both closer, eyes stinging, heart full. Because sometimes the courtroom doesn't give you closure. It gives you home. Snow was falling in soft flurries outside the penthouse windows, dusting the skyline in white. Inside, the warmth was unmistakable, not just from the fireplace crackling in the corner or the lights strung around the tall pine tree in the living room, but from something deeper, something felt, not seen. It was Christmas Eve. James stood in the kitchen, wearing a flannel apron now streaked with flour, gingerbread dough clinging to his sleeves. He had no idea what he was doing, but Lily assured him he was getting better. Lucas sat at the island counter, carefully icing reindeer cookies, his tongue poking from the corner of his mouth in concentration. Sarah watched from a nearby armchair, a cup of peppermint tea in her hands, and peace in her eyes. It had been 3 weeks since the court ruling, 3 weeks since the weight of uncertainty had finally lifted, and in that short time something remarkable had bloomed in the silence between them. Routine, laughter, trust, family. "Your cut, putting the antlers on backward," Lily teased, nudging James with her elbow. He looked down at his misshapen cookie. "Let's call it abstract art." Lucas smirked. "More like accident art." James chuckled, flicking a little flour in their direction. "All right, tough crowd." Suddenly, the lights dimmed. Lily gasped and turned toward the hallway. "Lucas, did you do that?" Lucas shook his head. Then music started to play. Soft piano notes drifting through the penthouse speakers. James recognized the song immediately. "Oh, Holy Night." He turned slowly toward the doorway, and there stood Sarah, holding a small remote in her hand and smiling through quiet tears. "I thought we could use a little magic," she whispered. James swallowed the lump in his throat. "I think we already have it." After dinner, they gathered around the tree. It stood tall in the center of the room, its branches glittering with ornaments, some elegant and glass-blown, others hand-painted by Lily and Lucas. Near the top, nestled beside a golden star, was a single cookie ornament. Round, frosted, emblazoned with the word Hope. James looked at it for a long moment, remembering the day that changed everything. Central Park, the cardboard sign, the cookie in his hand that somehow felt like a message from a little girl he'd never stopped missing. Now, that message had become a life. Lily reached beneath the tree and pulled out a carefully wrapped gift, handing it to James with an enormous grin. "Open it, Daddy." He froze at the word. Daddy, still new enough to make his heart stutter, yet familiar enough to feel like it had always belonged to him. He peeled back the paper slowly, revealing a black leather journal. Inside, every page was filled. Drawings, letters, photos, a timeline of their story. Lily pointed to one page near the middle. "That's when you first made us pancakes, and here's when you helped me tie my shoes." Lucas spoke quietly. "And this one is from the night you told us we were safe." James's eyes blurred as he flipped through their memories, their truth written in crayon and courage. At the back of the journal, a simple message in both their handwriting. You were the wish we didn't know we could make. He closed the book gently, emotion welling up in his chest. I don't have a gift that can match this, he said, voice thick, but I do have something to give. He reached behind the couch and pulled out a wrapped box. Lily tore it open eagerly, and Lucas leaned in, curious. Inside were 3 silver keys, one for Sarah, one for Lucas, one for Lily. James spoke softly. They opened the new home I bought, not just the penthouse, a real home, with a yard, with space for movie nights, with a room just for Sarah when she's ready. Sarah covered her mouth, stunned. Lily squealed. You mean, like a real house? Not just fancy walls? James nodded. A place where no one can knock without being invited. A place that belongs to all of us. Lucas took his key, fingers tracing the grooves. Does it have a treehouse? James smirked. I think we can make that happen. Lily jumped into his lap, hugging him tightly. You didn't just give us a home. You gave us a forever. James held her close, one arm around Lucas, his other hand reaching out to Sarah. She clasped it with a quiet, grateful strength. The fire crackled behind them. Snow whispered against the windows. And in the middle of a city that never stopped moving, one family found stillness. Not in perfection, not in wealth, but in love that refused to leave. Because sometimes the people we lose leave space in us, space for something new to grow, and when we choose to open that space to others, when we dare to let ourselves love again, we don't just build homes. We build miracles.